This is the yellow crayon that changed gaming forever, and it all goes back to the year 1988, the same year the best Christmas movie of all time was released, the year the Dodgers crushed the Athletics in the World Series, and the same year that a single yellow crayon could have cost you days of your life. I want to keep this crayon in mind as it's the most important crayon in the world, and we'll be talking about it more later because today we're going to be talking about softlocks. A softlock is something that can happen in a video game where the systems and rules of that game interact with each other in such a way that the game becomes unplayable, unprogressible, or unbeatable due to how those systems work together. The game still runs, the code still flows, it's not crashed. That's a hard lock. This one's soft, chill, a relaxing sort of lock. Some are easy to do, some are difficult, but almost every video game out there has one lurking somewhere. I find it useful to think of the risk of soft locking to be something that exists on a sliding scale where one end is totally linear and the other is total freedom. Games like visual novels fall close to this side of the scale, while Minecraft is close to this end, and the further you go toward freedom, the higher your risk of allowing players to do things that harm themselves. In fact, soft locking Minecraft is surprisingly easy. In older versions, you could place your bed under a complete end portal and get stuck in the end permanently. This has been patched out in the latest versions, but my favorite strategy hasn't been, which is to cover the entire spawn chunk in lava. I went a bit overboard just to make sure I was screwed, but you get the point. Minecraft is an infinite playground, and Mojang's dedication to making sure you have the freedom to screw yourself over is the price that they have to pay for the rest of the game to work. Maybe you wanted to get stuck in an infinite respawn loop where you burn to death over and over again. Who are they to take that from you? That's not to say that games that don't allow you so much freedom are free from potential soft locks. One of the most well-known soft locks in the Pokemon franchise involves you heading into the Elite Four fight with only a fighting Pokemon who knows Rage and only has PP for that move. Save in Lorelai's boss room and your game file is doomed. Because of the way Gen 1 AI works, Lorelai's first Pokemon will only use Rest because it's a psychic type move that's super effective against fighting types. Rage, meanwhile, locks you into the move for the rest of the battle, repeating endlessly, doing tiny bits of damage that Dugong will always immediately heal from. There are ways out of this soft lock, of course, but they require either a fishing pole or a gamble on this percentage chance of a 1 in 256 miss glitch firing 20 times in a row. And you can see how freedom is the key risk factor here. Minecraft and Pokemon fall at near opposite ends of the total game freedom scale, but freedom, liberty, is the core conceit that ends up being the doom of all who might try to plan around every potential game-ruining event. In Minecraft, you can do just about anything you want, but Pokemon has a degree of freedom too. Nobody makes you take any specific Pokemon or items with specific movesets in them to the Elite Four with you. Ergo, the very small risk of a soft lock does exist, even in this pretty linear and controlled game. Easiness, freedom, and simplicity are the core formula variables in how damaging a soft lock can be, and all three are at the heart of the yellow crayon that irreversibly changed game design for all time. We're not ready to talk about that yet. Freedom, simplicity, and ease. All three of these come together into a single picture that makes it easier to figure out if a soft lock is possible, and if a soft lock is possible, whether you should waste time doing something about it. We recently just let players play our game in a closed alpha playtest on Steam. Our game is one with a lot of freedom in it. You can go anywhere you can go and place anything that can be placed. We designed it in this way so players would be allowed to shape their home island the way they want. Make it a beautiful, cozy hamlet against the sea, or just a few cottages nestled in the woods. Don't want to farm over here and want to farm over there? That's fine. Freedom. On the scale, the game currently falls about here. There are limits, but a lot of room to move within those limits. But about halfway through the playtest, we decided to push an update that gave players access to the full scope of creative tools we've developed to see what they came up with. This included more objects to decorate with, but more crucially, we gave them access to our terraforming tools. These were tools capable of adding and subtracting land. The intent behind the tool was to allow small adjustments, maybe medium-sized ones for the particularly dedicated, but since I wasn't making any videos at the time and was just busy playing the game for fun, a thought did cross my mind. I wonder if there's a soft lock here. Can I, if I work hard enough, render our game not only unprogressible to some small degree by locking out the end game, but actually leave it in a completely unplayable state. I knew it was theoretically possible, but if I was to let my inner Picaspre emerge, how was I going to do it? How hard would it be? How hard could it be? If I was going to figure it out, and in fact do it, I'd have to be smart about it and plan my course of attack. I had a ticking clock too to finish it before the alpha playtest ended, so I had to plan. First, let's talk a bit about how Animal Kind is set up. Being a part of the team, I have a bit more insight than a layperson into how our game works. These things will definitely change as we keep developing the game, but this is how they were during the playtest. First, the land. It's a voxel system generated from a static file, meaning everyone gets the same starter island at the moment they make their game. Several items in it are placed manually, but the rest are procedurally placed. These are things like sticks and rocks and berry bushes and trees and stuff like that. These are the resources that are used for crafting and cooking. NPCs are the beating heart of the quest system, and Sam, the squirrel here, is the shopkeeper. In the heart of the island is the portal that will take you to the wilderness where you could meet other players. This is a whole separate place from your main island. Crucially, the wilderness resets itself every so often if nobody is there, meaning you have a potential well of infinite resources if you really do mess things up at home. You play as an animal who does its core activities like farming and whatnot via a mech that it rides. Some of these actions take energy. This will become important information for later. At this stage of development, you could farm and craft and sell things to Sam and do various quest lines. To set up the ultimate softlock for Animal Kind, several things had to happen. One, I had to remove the ability to travel to the wilderness so I couldn't play the game at all, even if I destroyed my island. Two, I had to remove the ability to make any money. Money makes the world go round, and if I have money, it's always possible to find a way to bust myself out of the softlock. Three, I have to remove access to the NPCs. Like number two, several quests can give you resources and access to further tools, and any number of which might rescue my world from destruction. And number four, ideally, I'd have to delete all the land. I didn't even know if this was possible at the outset, but the ultimate version of the softlock in my mind was to be left swimming in the ocean out of power, unable to do anything except watch the sun rise and set. As an extra parameter, I wanted to do this all in our actual build without cheating or any admin tools. Sure, like deleting the land was trivial with admin tools for editor access. Like, just look how easy it is to do in Unity if I want. Brian didn't understand the vision, but I needed to walk in the shoes of our players. I really wanted to see what it was like to render our game unplayable. Like, how difficult was it? What level of pain would you have to go through? Was it trivial but unlikely like Pokemon, or was it a bit of work and something that could only be done with great focus like Minecraft? Only time would tell. And by the way, I didn't forget about the yellow crayon. Don't you worry, I'll put it right here as a reminder. We won't forget about the yellow crayon. For now, though, we have a game to ruin. Our game. This is how I soft-locked Animal Kind. We have our list of things to accomplish, but some of these are overlapping issues. Let's look at number one first, because number one and number four in particular have a strong relationship with one another. You see, the portal eventually lets players go to the wilderness once they've progressed Barney's storyline far enough, so getting rid of it before we can even get that far is ideal, but we do have to do Barney's quest line far enough that we get the ability to move objects, and these two missions are pretty close to one another. But there's something more to consider. You see, it may surprise you to learn that game devs, even of a chill, cozy game, tend to have a bit of a troll streak. Part of this is because we want to see what the extreme limits of our systems are, but also we like to mess with each other. As a result, we became aware early on that the ability to remove terrain willy-nilly could cause some problems. So Colin coded in this little thing that makes it possible to label some land as unable to be edited in any way. And the portal in the center of the island creates a zone around itself that cannot be removed. Furthermore, even with the super unlocked terrain editing features, you simply were not allowed to pick some things up like the home portal. This is due to the other softlock I discovered a year ago where you could just pick up the crafting bench and drop it off the edge of the island, never to be seen again. I promise I'm not the only troublemaker on the team. I just can't help myself sometimes. So the portal is a problem. It allows access to the wilderness where we'll always be able to harvest respawning items to sell to get ourselves out of a tricky situation, and it creates land that can't be destroyed. Since NPCs automatically search for land to stand on when you remove the land under them, that means getting rid of the home island actually impacts number 3 as well, as any NPC that has the land underneath them removed could just teleport to the last little chunk of land and be safe from our hijinks. It also could serve as a nexus point from which we could use the bulldozer to create more land and effectively undo any progress we've made in undoing our ability to progress. I tried everything to try to remove the portal, but honestly, I couldn't figure anything out. I was thoroughly stumped. So I did what any responsible person would do. I weaponized our Discord server. I put out the call in the announcements to see if anybody could find a way to remove the portal, fully expecting, frankly, nobody to find a way. Anyway, less than an hour later, Doc figured out how to remove the portal. You see, the decoration mode we use in the houses runs on different logic from the normal placement mechanics, so it doesn't have the same blockers associated with it. If you spammed trying to place a house in an area close to the portal, it eventually would place close enough that you could reach over and grab it with your mouse and put it in your inventory. And just like that, the game was on. DannyX666 also gets a shout out for figuring it out, since he didn't realize it was already solved when he did it and figured it out in about 5 minutes. I sold the portal to Sam, and just like that, number 1 was crossed off the list with a yellow crayon. This crayon, by the way, comes from a game you probably haven't heard of before, but it turned out to be one of the most important games of all time. Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. This was a Lucasfilm adventure game set in San Francisco, and it's very much the traditional adventure game of its time. In order to progress the story, you have to get certain objects and use them in a particular way, one of which is, of course, the yellow crayon. It's used for several key moments throughout the game, and very early in the game, you can place it in this slot in this door. If you do that, it is gone forever. With it gone and inaccessible, you can still progress the game until you get to the place in Seattle where you need to draw an ankh on the wall to get the blue crystal. If you can't get the blue crystal, you can't open the same door with the slot in it to meet Amy, the other character of the game, and therefore you can't progress any further. Depending on how fast you play this unplayable state could take you anywhere from 1 to 10 hours to figure out, and there's no indication that you've entered this unplayable state. Your save file is just doomed forever and you have to reset. Back in the day, this was called a dead end, not a soft lock, because they were a staple in the adventure game genre. That is, until Lucasfilm changed everything. It wasn't actually this game where things changed, but this marks the last time in the history of the genre that Lucasfilm games actually included dead ends in their game, finally recognizing that the practice wasn't actually very fun or enjoyable, saying in the manual for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the very next adventure game they put out, "We believe that you buy games to be entertained, not to be whacked over the head every time you make a mistake. So we don't bring the game to a screeching halt when you poke your nose in a place you haven't visited before. Save the game when you think you may be entering a dangerous area, but don't assume that every wrong step will result in death. Usually, you will get another chance." This was largely a reaction to player response to the punishing status quo of adventure games, and Zach McCracken specifically, and it marked a shift in the way game developers started to think about the games they put together. All art is informed by the medium it's created for. In 1903, the standard 10-inch 78 RPM record could hold about 3 minutes of music, so every song back then was about 3 minutes long. This was the case until LPs were invented, and suddenly you have Stairway to Heaven eating up 8 minutes, which would have ordinarily been impossible. Now, with streaming and TikTok, things have snapped the other direction. This trend holds with video games, which largely became big in arcades, which were driven by their ever-hungry thirst for quarters. This led designers to make games that could be enjoyed in short bursts that were also quite punishing, as to incentivize players to feed more quarters into the machine. Even when games started to become more of an at-home endeavor played on consoles and PCs, this old attitude towards games took a long time to dissolve, and therefore you end up with adventure games filled with arbitrary deaths, fail states, and dead ends that are easy to miss. I think our softlock is probably a lot harder than this, and I was starting to realize that it was probably harder than a softlock in Minecraft too. The portal was gone thanks to an easily patchable exploit, and I decided the next thing thing I should do before I wasted a ton of time was to try and make sure I could actually remove all the land and wouldn't somehow be stopped from getting to the final little bit. So I practiced my technique on the outer islands with almost no hiccups. Getting rid of them took a couple of hours and finished up my first day of work pretty solidly, but I had one more thing left to do. Realizing that removing our entire island would take an astronomically long period of time and also a ton of energy since terraforming was quite stressful for the mech, I realized I needed a more robust economy than the one I currently had, and I had just the plan. In order to enact it, however, I needed berries. Lots of berries. I did some basic farming to get as much money as I could, and then I planted about 500 bushes on top of each other. Berry bushes are unique in that they replenish berries automatically over time, so all I needed was enough bushes to make sure they would replenish themselves so fast that I could never stop collecting them. Turns out this was about 500 bushes, give or take. With my bushes planted, I set up a quick script to send the E to collect command every frame and went to bed, dreaming of my plans to come. When I came back the next day, my script had failed at some point, but not before collecting 52,001 berries, which I then turned into 10,464 jars of jam. Hopefully, this would be enough. Every so often, while terraforming, I'd have to stop and eat 3 jars of jam and get back to it. My strategy was simple. I would start high and work my way down, removing items and spawns as I went to make sure there wasn't any floating trees or stuff as I worked my way to the bottom. So I removed my berry bushes, sold the remains to Sam, and got to work. After an entire day, I'd removed most of my island's mountains, with the largest amount of the island still to go. Oh god. It took me all day just to remove some of it, and my biggest square footage was still staring down the barrel at me. Including prep, getting here alone took me about 15 hours, but I wasn't to be dissuaded. I had to know if a player could, if supremely dedicated, render their save file totally unsalvageable in the time allotted during the alpha playtest. It had to be done. The sunk cost fallacy had gotten me in way too deep. I crashed that night into a deep and fitful sleep, haunted by the specter of not completing my arbitrary project. As I dreamt memories of this confounded yellow crayon that changed everything at Lucasfilm crept into my dreamscape. Easiness, freedom, and simplicity. Adventure games, despite being linear, had a lot of freedom. Zach McCracken gave you the freedom to put any number of items in any number of things, including that darn slot in the door. It's your freedom to dump your inventory if you want. It's also simple. It doesn't require a ton of setup. It's just a couple clicks, and it's also easy. You don't have to click 1,000 crayon commands. It's just one promptless action, and like that, it's done. This was the straw that broke the camel's back at Lucasfilm, and they vowed to never again make their games arbitrarily unbeatable or difficult for no reason. With Ron Gilbert of Monkey Island fame even writing a diatribe against practices like these in adventure games in the Journal of Computer Game Design entitled Why Adventure Games Suck. 10 out of 10 title, no notes. This is the same shift in design philosophy that led to things like easy saving and loading and other checkpoint systems, and began the shift in game design space toward design that was more centered around what makes a game the most fun it can be, that eventually got us to multiple autosave slots and multiple saves and signals in the game that respect the player's intelligence. Did it go too far eventually with the yellow paint on the ladders? Maybe. Perhaps the final pigments of that McCracken crayon made its way onto the ladder somehow. Yellow, it seems, is both freedom to fail and freedom from failure. I awoke the next day with the realization that trees, branches, and berry bushes would continue to spawn on grass and the rocks on the stone areas. Normal players wouldn't know this, but I did. Nothing spawns on sand. So to make my life easier, I turned all the land into sand, and technically, if I was so inclined, if I'd collected all the items from the ground, sold them, and made sure my money was at zero and removed my crafting bench, I'd never be able to craft the other ground painting items. Since everything was sand, nothing could spawn that I could sell. Without the portal, I couldn't go to the wilderness for any of the other resources, so technically, if I wanted to give up now, I could. I'd already proven the core conceit that our game could be soft-locked, and probably easier than I'd originally anticipated. But it felt like cheating. All you have to do to address this is make something like a cactus or seashells that you can pick up, spawn on sand, and the soft lock is undone. I wanted the game to be ruined completely beyond debate. This was just a stepping stone on the way there to save myself time picking up 1,000 sticks and chopping down that many trees. So I soldiered on. Clearing land, eating jam, clearing land, eating jam. According to Steven, my stats reflected the monotony. Opening inventory and replenishing energy, an endless, never-ending cycle. As the close of another day approached, I found myself much further in my progress, with most of the land down to the water level, but with hours and hours of more work to do. I had, however, isolated Rosie on her own little island, and I could finally see what happens if you remove the normal land under an NPC, and the closest land to teleport to was many chunks away. Would she go in the water? She didn't have any swimming animations, so what would happen if she did? Would she just teleport really, really far away? Like, I honestly didn't know. I removed the land, and with nowhere to go, she just hovered there. I couldn't reach her to speak with her, so I had effectively found a way to handle goal number 3, which would be achieved by goal number 4. If all the land was gone, I wouldn't be able to talk to anybody. So I had to make sure if I wanted to hit all 4 marks, like getting rid of my money, that I had to do them in a very specific order, because if I deleted all the land before I sold my stuff to Sam, technically I'd still have stuff in my inventory that I couldn't get rid of, even though it would be functionally useless. I wanted it all gone. I closed out the 3rd day of my efforts, a bit tired and sore from the repetition, and with a lingering question in my mind. Why was I doing this? This was a bit far to go for a single little joke that was like, ha ha ha, I soft lock our game in the most obnoxious way possible. Give me treats, please. I think I'd already proven by virtue of how much work it was to even get here that soft locking our game was beyond difficult. Do we have an obligation to fix this? What is there a point to? Patching the portal removal makes sense, of course, and maybe adding a respawning sellable item on sand in case someone wants a desert island, but even those seem like unlikely scenarios to be concerned with. How much are game devs obligated to make sure you can't ruin your game? The first soft lock I ever experienced myself personally by mistake was the game Crayon, a Metrovania puzzle game described as a reverse horror game where you play as an alien monster trying to escape a science laboratory. It involves a lot of doors and levers, and I remember one area where the puzzle felt particularly difficult, like you had to be really fast to get through one of the doors after pulling the lever. I was like, this solution seems a bit sweaty, like maybe even bad design. After a lot of work though, I got through the door and I was ecstatic, only to realize I was locked in the area I'd just gotten into. It turns out, a soft lock. You weren't meant to go that way at all, but it was possible. My save file was toast unless I wanted to wait for a patch. I try to be an understanding person across the board, but I was pretty angry when this happened. It's hard not to be when you lose progress irreversibly and unintentionally. I was several hours in with no real prognosis on when there would be a patch, if ever, to address it. I was brought back to my childhood, to that damnable yellow crayon and the hours I had to replay in order to get back to where I was. At least I told myself the soft locking Crayon was unintentional and not a part of the core design of the game. It's wild to me that at one point this design thesis wasn't considered a bug to be avoided, but rather was a feature that was intentionally introduced to the design process that lingered until someone decided to ask, hey, what if we don't have to make our games unfun? What if we aren't the player's enemy? I think in the dance between tyranny and freedom you have as a game developer, finding the right tempo is key. I awoke, wrists and fingers cramping, on the dawn of the final day. The last of the island remained just under the water, which was encouraging and discouraging both. I knew from my previous tests that the final part of the land under the water was the most irritating to remove, as you'd constantly be falling in the water and occasionally moving to a different point of land, as our anti-falling through the floor scripts occasionally thought you would clip through the ground and would try to find a valid place to put you. I had to be careful now too, as if I crashed and loaded in at the wrong time after I'd removed my safety island, I wouldn't be able to reach my mech and finish my project, which technically means all I had to do was quit the game and then I'd be soft locked. The goal would be met if I was willing to throw in the towel. A harder version to be sure than the desert island soft lock, but at this point it was no longer about proving anything other than the capacity to finish the task. To whom? myself, I guess, the final boss of the gifted kid who now bears the weight of adulthood, the need to ever reach for goals to achieve, arbitrary and demanding for the sake of it. I had removed all the land for myself. My ADHD threatened to buckle at the sheer surface area of the remaining island, so I separated it into little chunks so I'd receive little dopamine boosts every time I removed one. Thankfully, I knew I'd have the energy in the game to complete the task now, having used way less than half of my 10,464 jars of jam to get this far. I soldiered on, removing land, determined to reach the final end of this many days-long journey and experiment to see how much work it would be to achieve the ultimate softlock. A madness overtook me, a sort of highway hypnosis as I fell into a flow. Soon, most of the island lay in oblivion, and naught but the final bits of land existed. I decided now was the time to unload the rest of my items and reduce my money to zero, so I sold all but 100 of my jams and every other item Sam could buy, and then bought as much as I could and sold it back to her over and over again until I had only 2 treats left. Not enough to buy anything. My hands were truly shaking now, as one screw up and my file would be beyond rescue and the task would be left forever incomplete, an itch in my mind that would be unable to be scratched for all time. Forever, the task would be almost complete, but never quite there. Removing the rest of the island took less than an hour, but it felt like an eternity. But finally, it was done. I ate all the jam, expended the rest of my energy, leaving my mech exhausted and unable to terraform even if any land existed, and I closed out the game only to enter again. I dropped into the ocean and everything lay out of reach, eternally above my head. My task finally was done. Animal kind was soft-locked in the most complete way, but more importantly, I was free of the Sisyphean task. Though unlike Sisyphus, I bore the burden of this curse of my own choice. Nobody forced me to roll this rock. In fact, some did try to stop me. But finally, I was atop the mountain despite everything. So where does this leave us? Should we fix this soft lock? Well, arguably, we already have by making it so you can't pick up the home island portal and remove it permanently. But even if it wasn't a factor, I think I'd argue no. It's sometimes considered bad YouTubing to take a stance on something and leave the moral lesson up for you to decide. But I think the answer here is clear. If someone wants to intentionally and through great effort break their own game, why should we take that from them? This scenario is most certainly one that you could never possibly reach unintentionally. And if you did, it's one that you should have the right to do. Maybe you have something to prove to someone else or to yourself. Maybe you want to spend 30 hours over 4 days of your life working just for one screenshot. Maybe you just want to see the world burn. The difference between now and 1988 is that the yellow crayon is still yours to do with as you wish, but the ruinous consequences it can have on your game are no longer cataclysmic. You have thousands of yellow crayons, and if you choose to throw them all into the sea, that is your choice. This dance between tyranny and freedom is a long one, and ultimately freedom always wins. No matter how much you try to design around player choice, they always find a way. You can guide players, protect them from their worst mistakes, but if they want to find the limits, you should let them. I've been Austin, we're Uncommon Games, this is Animal Kind. If you want to see more of our game and see further updates, subscribe to us and check out our game on Steam. I'm gonna see you later.